The funeral procession of the technocrat Chief Minister of Goa, Manohar Parrikar, former Defence Minister of India, Indian Army, Indian Navy and Goa police personnel join a crowd of thousands as they line up on either side of the road to the Miramar beach in Panaji, Goa, where Manohar Parrikar's last rites, where his cremation will be held shortly. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, members of the Union Cabinet, several other leaders are in Goa to pay their respects to Manohar Parrikar, Goa's Mr. Clean, Defence Ministry's Mr. Clean. Here was one man who brought about a major change, not just in Goa, but in the Ministry of Defence, in the manner in which he dealt with extremely complex issues. We have a battery of reporters on ground zero. Our Western India Bureau Chief and Senior Editor Sahil Joshi joins us from ground zero. Sandeep Unnithan, Executive Editor, India Today, with me in the studio. Rajdeep Sardesai, Consultant Editor, India Today Group, someone who knew Manohar Parrikar. In fact, this is a team that knew Manohar Parrikar well, had interacted with him extensively. They join me on the broadcast, and there you see Manohar Parrikar's mortal remains being carried by Indian Navy personnel for his last rites. Sahil, not a dry eye where you are at the Miramar beach in Panaji as Manohar Parrikar's mortal remains will be taken for their cremation, Sahil.
Gaurav, I don't have words at this point of time. I have never seen Goa like this before. I've been covering elections in Goa since 2002. But I've never seen people actually coming out in such a large numbers to pay their respect, other than a carnival. But this is something, a rare sight in Goa. I mean, my cameraman can turn you around, can see the Miramar beach where the former Chief Minister of Goa and Goa's beloved son will be cremated. As you were mentioning, the Navy personnel are taking Manohar Parrikar to the ground where he will be finally cremated. Look at the crowd. I mean, people have taken out their mobile phones, clicking pictures, trying to take a last glimpse of Manohar Parrikar. Manohar Parrikar was truly a Goan leader who made his mark at the national level, which is quite rare for the Goans. Goa being a small state, at the national politics, it hardly has any standing. But a leader emerging from Goa as a MLA, then the leader of opposition, and then finally the Chief Minister, was made to be a Defence Minister of India and made his mark at such a level that today the whole India is looking at him, and truly for Goa also, this is something which they had ever dreamt of. He is truly a only Goan politician who is now recognized at the national level. Despite normally the Goan politicians are known for this Ayaram Gayaram politics, which of course Rajdeep will be able to explain in a better way, because this politics was quite evident in 1990s when Manohar Parrikar emerged on Goa's political scene, and he actually is the one who brought the Goa out of this Ayaram Gayaram politics.
And look at the situation even today.
The visuals which
hours after he passed away, the BJP is unable to find a replacement for Manohar Parrikar. And Rajdeep, as a journalist and as a proud Goan, how is Goa dealing with Manohar Parrikar passing away? The BJP is finding it trouble to find a replacement. Is the situation just the same with Goa?
I think what's happened, and I think that's the unfortunate part, that even as we pay respects today to a great son of Goa and someone who was a fine politician, the power struggle is going on. Even as the funeral rites are being performed, we are told that Nitin Gadkari was asked to broker some kind of a truce between the BJP and its allies to find a consensus candidate who could be chief minister. But the allies are holding firm. They want at least 2 deputy chief ministers. And that shows how in the absence of Manohar Parrikar, you can see almost the vultures who are now circling around this coalition, trying to see what they can extract out of it. And that, Gaurav, reveals to me that Manohar Parrikar was the BJP in Goa and the BJP was Manohar Parrikar. And that perhaps was, in a sense, both his strength and his weakness, because with him no longer there on the stage, the glue that held this coalition together, where the BJP had just 13 MLAs in a 40-member assembly, that glue is gone. And now to rely on independents and rely on these smaller parties like the MGP and the Goa Forward is going to be very difficult. So even if a chief minister comes to power, I fear that we could be back to the bad old days of Goa, where in the 1990s we had 9 governments in 9 years.
Yes.
So that's the worry, that's the concern, that in the absence of Manohar Parrikar, can this coalition which has been worked on by Mr. Parrikar, for which he went back from Delhi to Panjim, will it be over? How long will it be able to sustain itself? I think these are going to be troubling questions, Gaurav, because clearly the BJP doesn't have and never looked at a clear replacement for Manohar Parrikar. The 2 names that are doing the rounds, one of Pramod Sawant, he's relatively junior compared to some of the allies itself, and they will not so readily accept him. And the second is Vinay Tendulkar, the Goa BJP chief, who is not a member of the Vidhan Sabha and therefore would have to be elected to get into the Vidhan Sabha. But, I think today is really a day to remember Manohar Parrikar, and I hope that, these scenes in a sense reflect the manner in which he was loved in Goa itself. He was able to cut across all those divides that traditionally existed in Goa politics, North versus South, Hindu versus Catholic. He was able to rise above that. He was the first BJP MLA of Goa in the early 90s, and from there to take it to a position where in 2012 it actually got a majority required a lot of hard work, and he built this party brick by brick. At times he was controversial. He was accused of breaking some of the smaller parties. He was accused also of Sam Dam Dand Bhed politics at times, but he himself, I think, acquired a reputation as someone who was reform friendly, who was progressive, who was development oriented. And even though he was associated with the Ram Janmabhoomi movement in the 1990s, by 2012 he had a ministry where he had as many Catholics as he had Hindus. And I think that in a sense reflected how Manohar Parrikar evolved himself, how Goa's politics evolved. And I think the outpouring that you are seeing today is because he provided a stability to a state which otherwise was looking for a leader who could give them that sense of Goan identity. He's going to be probably cremated next to where the first chief minister of Goa, Dayanand Bandodkar, was cremated at Miramar beach. And I think that is how Manohar Parrikar is being seen today, as the chief minister after Dayanand Bandodkar, who gave Goans a sense of pride. There have been other chief ministers like Pratap Singh Rane who probably ruled longer, but I think Manohar Parrikar, as defense minister, as Goa chief minister, gave Goans a sense of pride and identity as a Goenkar, as a first IITian to become the chief minister of a state. I think there's a natural outpouring of pride that you're seeing, an emotional attachment, and that Bhai, as he was called.
A tremendous emotional attachment, and we'll talk about that in greater detail, Rajdeep. But since you mentioned defense, I also want to bring in Sandeep Unithan. Sandeep, here was a man who came from Goa because he had a reputation, Mr. Clean. That Mr. Clean was brought by Prime Minister Narendra Modi not only to clean up the mess, but also start something, build something which really needed to be built up. And he really did, from modernization to acquisition to the surgical strikes, Sandeep.
Absolutely, Gaurav. The late Field Marshal Manekshaw once said that, Indian politicians, a majority of them didn't know the difference between a guerrilla and a gorilla. Now, Manohar Parrikar was certainly not any of those, and he was in fact one of the first technocrat defense ministers that we've ever had in India. Most of our defense ministers have been grassroots politicians. They've been, some remarkable personalities like the late George Fernandez, Mr. A.K. Antony, the longest served defense minister. What Mr. Parrikar got to South Block was the fact that he was an IITian. He understood defense like nobody else. And the fact is that he was actually a small and medium enterprise supplier to the defense ministry once in the 90s, and
Yes.
he was, he was deprived of a contract despite his design having passed. So when he came here to go to South
MOD.
Block, and he was, meeting these MSMEs, he says, "Look, I understand your pain. I have been exactly in your shoes, and this is the kind of thing that we must, break down. And we need MSMEs to get your Make in India and Swadeshi defense and all of that." So he was a guy who got the big picture. He is the guy who pushed aggressively for reform, for modernization, cutting flab in the ministry. There's been a slew of reforms that he's pushed for, the General Shekatkar Committee
Yes.
on reducing defense expenditure. So he was a
Women
guy
in
who had
combat. The
women
man who cleared women to be fighter pilots in
and
India.
Gaurav, let's not forget, one rank, one pension.
Yes.
He's the man who's actually, I've been told, he just pulled a paper out and did a back of the envelope calculation and said, "Look, this is how much I need to pay the defense ministry. We can the armed forces. We can surely afford 9,000 crores a year."
Yes.
And the other big thing that he's done was the fact that, as you know, Gaurav, General VK Singh had highlighted this fact of hollowness in the armed forces, that
Yes.
literally thousands of crores worth spares and ammunition that had not been bought over the years. Mr. Parrikar came in and he slowly started building this up, and this is stuff that you're not going to see in the public domain because they're not like the say the tanks and the gunships that you'd parade on the Republic Day.
True.
But these are those little things that really make the difference in a long war.
He was a doer. He was a doer,
absolutely.
Rajdeep, and perhaps that is why we see this outpouring, Rajdeep, on the streets of Goa. Even as he presented his last budget, he had that pipe in his nose. He was battling cancer, and he kept saying that, despite that feeder pipe, he said, "I will serve Goa to my last breath." And Rajdeep, he did that. Perhaps that's the reason for the outpouring.
At one level, yes, though I have a slightly different view. I believe he should have stepped aside a few months ago when his health had reached a stage where it was becoming impossible for him to function. Personally, Gaurav, and this is purely personal, when I saw him that day at the inauguration of a bridge in Mandavi with those, with the tubes in his nose, and his throat was very he was struggling to speak.
Yes.
I thought it was being a bit unfair to him, the individual, because I like to see Manohar Parrikar from happier days. He was
Yes.
always an ever smiling presence, energetic presence. That was Manohar Parrikar that I wanted to see.
And a
I
great
think
sense of humor.
that's right. And I think towards the end, because no one else could hold this coalition together, it was almost as if the party was left with no choice but to keep him in the post. And I thought that was a bit unfair both to him and to Goa, because it became difficult for him to conduct cabinet meetings. He struggled through a parliament session that was held, and even at that function that was there when the new Mandavi bridge was being inaugurated, you could see that he was visibly unwell. Yes, he wanted to serve Goa till his last breath, but I think when you sometimes then get so close to, when you enter a phase in life where it's a matter of life and death, then maybe he could have been better off just spending his last days with his family, friends. But that's politics, I guess, and not easy for anyone to, for me or anyone to sit in judgment.
When we posed that question to him,
Yes.
Rajdeep, he said that he wanted to serve Goa till his last breath. He was the one who had built Goa, the manner in which he did want to bring about the change. And you remember that last, when he interacted with people, when he said, "How's the Josh?" And he said, "My Josh is high."
But you're right, Gaurav, but in September last year, when during Ganesh Chaturthi, he again fell ill and
Yes.
again had to be hospitalized. At that stage, he actually, when he was here at AIIMS, he was more than ready to give it up. And the party did look for alternatives at that moment and realized, perhaps the BJP realized there were no alternatives to Mr. Parrikar, and then asked him to stay back. But I think in the last year, it became a tough battle for him
Yes.
against cancer, because the decline was very swift. But, as I said, I think we should remember him from happier times. He was a 4-time chief minister, became the defense minister of the country, and to be fair to him, never hankered for the defense ministry job. In fact, it almost came to him unexpectedly.
Yes.
It was not something that initially he was very it was not something that came naturally to him, because he was happier being he wanted to be a 5-year Goa chief minister, complete a full 5-year term, actually work in a sense to rebuild Goa, the new Goa that he spoke about. Then he's sent here as defense minister, and initially it wasn't an easy period, but as Sandeep and you are pointing out, he took to the job. And he took to it with the same focus that he took to anything that he did even in Goa. The Goa Film Festival. Within months of that announcement, he was able to put the annual Goa Film Festival together. And I think that was one of his other big achievements in the context of Goa. Putting it there on the world film map, if you would, in a way. Infrastructure again in Goa. And I think in defense, he was looking to sort of ensure that the Jawans were looked after.
That was his priority one.
He was trying to see himself, much like George Fernandez in another era, trying to cut through the red tapeism and the bureaucracy that bedevils the defense ministry. So I think that was he was a decisive leader. He took decisions, sometimes didn't please everyone. In Goa, they used to call him Chota Modi at times.
Yes.
They felt that he had the same style of Mr. Modi. But I think much like Mr. Modi, he had very little time for bureaucratic red tapeism and tried to push through projects and was reasonably successful.
And quite a workaholic, Sandeep. I mean, he used to come to Defense Ministry very early in the morning. Rajdeep, as Sandeep was just telling us a short while ago, he would put pen to paper immediately, do the arithmetic on everything himself, including Rajdeep and Sandeep, on aircraft acquisition, engines, submarines. Sandeep, on submarines, he knew whether we should go in for nuclear submarines or for conventional class submarines and what it takes to have better engines for our aircraft.
Yeah, absolutely, Gaurav. I mean, the biggest thing that he's actually done is to save this project of the light combat aircraft, Tejas. Now, we all know that the Tejas has a long and troubled development history. Now, the Air Force did not want the Mark 1 variant that was offered to them. They wanted to go in for Mark 2, which would take many, many years, and this would actually literally result in the death of the program. So Mr. Parrikar stepped in and told the Air Force, look, I know you want Mark 2, but would you accept Mark 1A with these modifications? So he's the one who actually pushed the Air Force to go for this Mark 1A. HAL has come back with all those modifications, and we could pretty soon have a light combat aircraft, a much more advanced variant of this. And if you ask people at the HAL, they will tell you he was the man who saved this very, very critical aerospace program from being closed down. And the other points that you mentioned, Gaurav, about submarines and getting into the nuts and bolts of defense deals. I mean, he's the guy who actually astonished the bureaucrats, the private industry, with his absolute depth of knowledge. I mean, he's a guy who could, talk about, the indigenous component of the nuclear submarine versus, the indigenous component of a imported conventional submarine and argue for, this is better than that. And so you could not actually bowl him a googly, if I might add.
He could not be taken for a ride because he would sit with papers, do the arithmetic himself. And Sahil, this was something that he had started out in Goa itself. The reason why he was brought to Delhi was because Manohar Parrikar was Mr. Clean, whether it was cracking down on the mining mafia of Goa or sorting out the middlemen in Delhi in the Ministry of Defense. Sahil, it was because he cleaned the mess that he was brought to Delhi, Sahil. Okay, Sahil, we'll re-establish that line with Sahil in just a moment, but let's take a look at those images from ground zero at the Miramar beach in Goa. You have service personnel at this point of time paying their respects to Manohar Parrikar. And Rajdeep, his love for Goa was so much, he would fly to Goa very often. And Rajdeep, one of the privileges of being Defense Minister of India is that you have an Embraer jet at your disposal. He wouldn't take that Embraer. He would fly commercial and economy class.
That was again something which some saw as a criticism of Manohar Parrikar, that why does the defense minister need to go to Goa so often. It was a criticism, I remember, of Sharad Pawar also when he was defense minister in the early 90s. Why does he fly every weekend to Maharashtra? But I think in the case of both Mr. Pawar and Mr. Parrikar, their heart was ultimately in their home state. Yes. And I think in the case of Mr. Parrikar, particularly because it's a small state like Goa, he almost felt proprietorial over it. That even if I'm in Delhi, I must manage what's happening in Goa. And he was very conscious that he was, in a sense, the karta dharta in a way of the BJP in Goa. As I said, it's a double-edged sword. It gave him this larger-than-life image, but today, in his absence, the BJP is struggling to find a replacement. But yes, he wanted his fish curry rice. He wanted to see the sights of the sand and the sea breeze of Goa. I remember the last time I met him was in July 2018, and he'd just come back from New York. And he said, I'm glad to be back in Goa because I was missing my food, and I was missing the monsoon air of Goa because it was July of 2018. So I think, the attachment to land, the attachment to his people was so strong. And I think he thought he could do much more as Goa Chief Minister in a way than he could even as Defence Minister. He thought he could dramatically transform Goa into this new Goa. I think in 2017, when he was made to head that government, which included these smaller parties, life became much more difficult. In 2012, he had a majority government, and therefore could push through with many of his programs. By 2017, when he went the last time, not only did his health slip away a few months later, but I think what really affected him was the manner in which now he had to deal with these smaller parties, each of whom wanted a share of the pie. And that, I think, was the disappointment in a way for Mr. Parrikar and indeed for Goans. I think in his last term, he wasn't the dynamic Goa Chief Minister that we'd known him in earlier terms. But you're right, he was happy to go back to Goa as often as possible, and yes, not take the VVIP aircraft and take the benefits of public monies, but do it at his own expense.
And in Goa, he would travel on his scooty. When he could ride, he would do it himself. When he couldn't ride, he would ride pillion on a scooty, go from one lane to the other, have chai at the neighborhood chai wala,
there's a story, we don't know whether it's true or not, that there was once there was a white ambassador car with a lal batti that hit him while he was on his scooter, and it was being driven by a senior police officer's son. So the police officer's son got out and did the typical Delhi act, don't you know who I am? And Parrikar removed his helmet and I said, I do, but I am the Chief Minister.
Incidentally, the story is true.
So whether it's true or not, but it's a wonderful story. The very fact that many people believe it is perhaps a sign of the man.
He himself told me the story when I interviewed him in Goa. You remember that interview at Goa? I asked him this question and he said, yes, but it wasn't a serious accident. I just told him, "Arey, main to tumhara mukhyamantri hu."
That's right. But the very fact that, it's an improbable story. When you really think of it, which other chief minister, possibly a Manik Sarkar in Tripura, and maybe one or two others over the years, have had this kind of simplicity in their lifestyle? Look, there have been allegations in recent times over the way the casino mafia has been taking over Goa, question marks over the land mafia, even the miners are back, and there have been questions whether Mr. Parrikar has done enough. But I think simplicity was his hallmark. He never... there was nothing ostentatious or flashy about what he did. He was a pragmatic, practical man who looked for what was beneficial both to the Defence Ministry here in Delhi and what could be to the benefit of the BJP in Goa. And I think that practicality is what really stood out. The simplicity of the man and the practicality of his life experiences. You're right, as an IIT, and I think he knew as much as many of the engineers here in Delhi who were advising the Defence Ministry, let's say on a project, or indeed in Goa, let's say on building a bridge. So he was very conscious that, look, I am an IIT and you can't pull the wool over my eyes. I remember even on the surgical strikes, I believe he slept only at 6 a.m. That day.
Absolutely.
So I asked him, how come didn't you sleep a week? He said, in IIT when I had to cram for my exams also, I used to work all night. So I'm used to staying up till late.
In fact, he too was in the war room.
Thanks for watching the video. For more such news and updates, please like, share and subscribe to India Today. Also check out our other great videos from our channel. We know you will love to.